Thank you for joining today's virtual briefing on avian influenza. Our first speaker is Governor Kathy Hochul.
Good morning. I want to give an update to New Yorkers on a potential health issue that's been detected in our state. Over the last week, inspectors have detected 7 cases of bird flu in poultry during routine inspections at live bird markets in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. Our state egg and markets is now working closely with market owners to depopulate all infected flocks. Out of an abundance of caution and to thwart any further transmission, we're issuing a notice and order to temporarily shut down all live bird markets in New York City, as well as in Westchester, Nassau, and Suffolk counties. The order is effective today through next Friday, February 14th. Here's what that means. For a week-long period, no poultry can be delivered to those live bird markets. Each uninfected market must sell down all inventory, undergo thorough cleaning and disinfection, and then remain closed for at least 5 days. Each must then be inspected by our state egg and markets before they can reopen. These are just simply measured, common sense steps that'll curb the spread of bird flu and ultimately to keep New Yorkers safe, which is always my top priority. Now, I want to reiterate that people should not be concerned. Let me be clear, there is no immediate public health threat. We have been vigilant and will remain vigilant so New Yorkers can go about their lives with peace of mind. But safeguarding public health is all about being proactive, and especially when it comes to fighting infectious diseases. And I'm proud to say here in New York, we have some of the best public health experts in the world on our team, and some of them are on this call. So I'll let them speak in more detail about the actions we're taking today to protect New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Hochul. Our next speaker is Dr. James McDonald.
So good morning, everyone. Good to be with you this morning. So the steps that we're taking this morning are prudent and really consistent with our approach to be vigilant when addressing the threat of H5N1 in New York State. The New York State Department of Health is using all the tools at its disposal to monitor for avian influenza in human beings, and we're prepared for widespread testing should the need arise. I just want to make sure people have this. It's really important to understand this. At this time, there's no human cases of avian influenza that have been diagnosed in New York State. And just to give you some context, we've had 67 cases in the United States since 2022. Right now, the New York State Department of Health assesses the threat to the public as low. There's no immediate public health threat. Just to give you some more context, H5N1 is an influenza A virus. You know, this particular strain so far has not demonstrated the ability to easily transmit to humans. The people most at risk becoming infected with H5N1 are people who have contact with infected birds or infected poultry, cattle, or other animals. You know, when you get infected from an animal, that's called a zoonosis. And really, that's the folks who are at risk. I want people to keep this in mind as well. H5N1 has been prevalent in birds for several years across the globe, really. And while less so, we've seen it in other mammals as well throughout the world as well. But really, it's been most prevalent in birds. And most recently, we've heard more about it in dairy cattle in particular. You know, let me assure you, the department's epidemiologists, laboratory scientists, and myself have been closely monitoring the global, national, and local information and disease trends for indications of public health risk to humans. Wadsworth, our state health laboratory, has more than sufficient testing for H5N1 and substantial additional surge capacity if needed. Our laboratory has additional supplies available from a national repository to support the expansion of testing in the event of an emergency, which right now is simply not the case. In the current situation we have with the live bird markets, I've spoken with Dr. Michelle Morris, the acting commissioner of the New York City Department of Health, twice this week, and our teams are collaborating daily. The City Health Department is already instructing exposed individuals to monitor for signs of illness. They've given out brochures in multiple languages, including English, Spanish, Chinese, and other languages. They will test anyone with symptoms and offer Tamiflu as a preventive medication when appropriate. I would like to remind everyone in general, you should avoid contact with dead or ill birds. You know, and for folks that do keep chickens, ducks, or geese, you should familiarize yourselves with clinical signs of avian influenza and contact a veterinarian or the New York State Department of Ag and Markets if multiple birds die suddenly or if signs of avian influenza. And for anyone who works with livestock, particularly dairy or poultry, you should be wearing personal protective equipment. And also want to remind people, I'm the state health commissioner. I'm always going to talk to you about the flu shot whenever I can, my friends, right? So it's important to get the seasonal flu vaccine. And the reason I just mentioned that is seasonal flu vaccines do not protect against avian influenza. But why that's a good recommendation is it may help us reduce the chance of someone getting infected with seasonal flu and avian flu at the same time. You don't want the viruses together because if they merge, that could create a resistant strain. Let me stop there and turn it over to Deputy Secretary Walters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. The Department of Agriculture and Markets has been certainly watching HPAI closely and monitoring both at the state and national level. We have been dealing with this situation for several years in our poultry industry and more recently, our dairy industry. The situation we are seeing across the country is concerning for all of us, but with additional detections here in New York State and poultry, most recently in live bird markets, we can understand the public's concern about this disease. While New York continues to have no cases of HPAI in our livestock or humans, and the risk to the public is low, as Dr. McDonald talked about, I want New Yorkers to know that we are on top of this and doing everything we can to keep New York animals and people safe. Commissioner Ball and Commissioner McDonald regularly talk on this issue, as do our teams. We are also working with the Department of Environmental Conservation to monitor the wild bird population as well, as that is a common way that HPAI enters our farms. We are all on the same page and continue to need to take aggressive and proactive steps to prevent the transmission of HPAI in animals and protect public health. We are also closely collaborating with our partner organizations, including USDA, CDC, and FDA. Our top veterinarian is in close communication with state veterinarians across the country. We want to learn from what other states have gone through and be able to react and address concerns in New York. We have been keeping our industry informed every step of the way through webinars and public communications. We are encouraging enhanced biosecurity measures on our farms, the use of PPE, and more. We have been monitoring avian influenza in poultry since 2022 and have ramped up our actions at the very first case of dairy cattle in Texas nearly a year ago in March. The department immediately implemented a very rigorous policy regarding HPAI to protect the state's animals, as well as farm workers in poultry and dairy. This includes the restrictions on the import of animals into New York State. Starting in April, we prohibited the importation of dairy cattle from premises with either confirmed or investigated for HPAI, including shortening the time for certificates of veterinarian inspection and making sure that they were attestations to the fact that these animals did not come from infected premises. In June, we announced new testing requirements for lactating dairy cattle entering fairs and exhibitions in the state. This included the Great New York State Fair, County Fair, and other exhibitions. In August, we required testing for non-lactating dairy cattle before importation into New York State from cows that originated from states that had confirmed cases of HPAI. Then in December, we started working on our national testing strategy in dairy cattle. We started with webinars to talk to the industry about what this would look like, what we would do for testing, and what would happen if we found it and had to quarantine dairy premises. Then in January, we started testing. We are participating in the USDA National Milk Testing Strategy to facilitate surveillance of HPAI in the nation's milk supply. We are testing all grade A silos in New York State intended for pasteurization. I want to stress here that pasteurization kills the virus and milk is safe to drink. Additionally, because raw milk permit holders in the state are not included in the USDA testing strategy, New York State took additional steps and issued a notice and order requiring mandatory monthly testing of HPAI and raw milk permits. Together, the notice of order and the state's participation in the national milk testing strategy further support the protection of health of New York dairy herds and poultry operations. This latest measure in temporary closing our live bird markets is aimed at doing the same thing. The public should know that the state is using all the tools at its disposal in an effort to safeguard New York animals and New York people. I'll happy to answer any questions and thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We will now begin the Q&A portion of our briefing. Please use Zoom's raise hand function to notify us if you have a question. Once your name is announced, we will unmute your line. Our first question is from Roger Stern. Roger, your line is now open for questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I have a question for the governor. How much of a hit does she expect on grocery store prices from this?
Hi, it's Dr. McDonald. The governor actually stepped away. I think just Deputy Commissioner Walters now be here to answer questions. And, maybe I could actually grab that question just a little bit for you. I think when you really look at how egg prices are going up, I think this is something that people really care about, right? Is why am I paying more money for eggs? And I think the main reason for that is when you think about H5N1, it's called highly pathogenic avian influenza. What highly pathogenic means is when it infects the chicken, it kills the chicken. And it's going to spread very contagiously. So other chickens in the whole flock will be infected rather quickly. So that global strategy has been to depopulate the chickens. And really, so what's happening is because this is so prevalent, we're just losing chickens. When you lose chickens, you don't get eggs. I think we all know how that part works. This is why egg prices are going up so much. And part of why we're seeing more detections is because H5N1 is more common now in the wild bird population. And because birds migrate, this is part of what happened in Suffolk County with the duck community down there with all those commercial ducks down there. And we've seen it in other parts of New York as well. You're just seeing more of these detections. And I think it's just important to show that with this particular case in particular, one thing I think it's really important, please don't miss this point. These cases in the live bird markets were detected on surveillance. In other words, we went looking for the problem, and this is what you do in public health. We work together and we look for problems. So this is a good thing that we're doing. This is why it's prudent, and we're just being vigilant about this because we really don't want to have people infected in New York State. So really it's about protecting people. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, and we're allowing any impacted market or unimpacted markets, in the city and Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester to sell down their stock as well. So they'll be able to do that. We are continuing to stress the importance on farms of biosecurity because ultimately that's how we help bring products to market. So as we continue to get farms to enhance their biosecurity, as the migratory season shifts, we will see a dip in cases. So there will be relief to this in the future. But unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of detections in poultry across the country. To the north of us in Canada, they're dealing with the same thing. So there really is a market constriction of availability of eggs in poultry. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner and Commissioner. Our next question is from Ethan G. Ethan, your line is now open.
You hear me? Hello.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning. This is Ethan Garinger-Samuth from Cranes, New York. Has there been a detection of bird flu in a live market in New York or in one of the areas that's under restriction now?
Yes, to date, we have 7 detections in live bird markets. So we are taking this additional preemptive uh, action to wipe out the disease across the chain. These markets are very closely linked by source flocks, distributors. So we think it's really important to get in there, have a period of the markets being down so we can stamp out this disease. But yes, we have had detections, and they were found in our routine surveillance practice that we normally do.
Those were specifically in New York City?
Yes,
And those happened since the Crescent Duck Farm exposure?
correct.
Could you tell me when those were detected?
They were detected in January 31st, February 5th, and 4th.
And are you able to tell me where those detections were specifically, like what neighborhoods?
We identify by county, and so we have cases right now in Queens, Kings, and the Bronx.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Our next question is from Jimmy Vielkind. Jimmy, you now have permission to speak.
Hello, thank you. I'm just trying to get a sense of the scope. How many markets are affected? How many birds generally move through these markets? And what's the distribution between the 5 boroughs, Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester? And then as a corollary to that, are there upstate markets that are operating for live birds? And why are they not affected at this point?
Good question. So we have approximately 80 markets that will be impacted by this order. As to the number of birds that move through these markets, I don't have the data on that. The distribution network in the city and downstate are very connected with shared distributors, shared source flocks. And then we do have markets that are upstate in Schenectady, Onondaga, and Erie counties. But those markets share different source flocks and they have different distribution companies, so they are not affected at this time. But we are still continuing to do routine surveillance in those markets, and we will increase the surveillance that we're doing there just because of how many detections that we are seeing at this time.
That concludes our program. Thank you for joining us today.